Has everyone placed their noodles order to support the PTO? I'm just saying, get those orders in now.
Jenny, the only other member we're expecting is Carrie, and Leslie has to leave at 5:30. So I'm hoping we can get started just to make sure we have enough people for some of the votes.
Sounds good. It's 5 o'clock and I will call the library board meeting to order. Can I have a roll call?
Sure. Nelson.
Here.
Stata.
Here.
Bergstrom.
Here.
Beschen. Goplin.
Here.
And
Severson. I see Carrie.
Hi. Trying to get my camera to work here.
Excellent. Thank you. I need a motion to adopt or amend the agenda.
I will move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Awesome. Can I have a second?
Seconded by Goplin.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next on the agenda is community input. So we allow up to 15 minutes for people to provide input at 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anybody on the call that would like to say anything?
It looks like Mike has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, you're on mute. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
That better?
Yes, we can hear you, Mike.
I just wanted to congratulate you all for reaching a milestone of actually having a place to put the library. I suspect that's got to be a big relief for you. And I wanted to stress that you know, my putting forward the MOU the other night was really to reassure the community and you know, from my discussions with you, I know you're all on board with a lot of the environmental concerns and then intended to do that anyway. So it really was aimed at hopefully making your and my life easier going forward, with the community realizing that we're really committed to building a environmentally sound library, and I'm thrilled the project's going to move forward. So congratulations and thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate all of your help in making sure that everything is moving along and getting approved. And we are, I don't know everybody else, I'm really excited and excited what we can do and what we can show people what we can do. So I'm very excited about it. So thanks, Mike. Is there anybody else on the call that wants to speak from the public? Okay, we will move on then to the consent agenda. I need a motion to approve or amend the minutes from the January 12th meeting.
Data moves to adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
Do I have a second to approve the meeting minutes from January 12th?
Seconded by
Bergstrom?
Goplin.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks, Carl. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, review and payment of bills and review and accept financial reports. Can I have a motion to approve them together?
So moved.
Then there's a second.
Second by Bergstrom.
Thank you. Jennifer, is there anything you want to point out?
I just want to point out the TIS Banks line is for a spoken word poetry workshop that Kelly is coordinating. It's a 4-session workshop in total, and it's in collaboration with this school. She's reaching out with so many community partners for that. So that should be a really great workshop. It is funded by a grant, so that isn't coming out of our budget, but is a really exciting opportunity. You also see a number of kind of large expenditures for SCLS. So that is our annual allocation for a various number of fees that we pay to the South Central Library system, including our tech support, our shared automation system, our Overdrive magazines, our Overdrive statewide contribution. So lots of different things you're seeing that are one-time annual expenses. If you have questions about any of those, I'm happy to answer. And I think that's the only thing I wanted to highlight. Happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Does anyone have questions, things that like clarified? Okay, all in favor of approving and paying bills, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Anything on the financial statements, Jennifer, you want to point out?
I just highlighted a couple numbers now that 2021 is almost closed out. Our expenses for our library operating expenses were about 96%. We were just a little bit under where we would expect to be because we had some position vacancies, and because of not charging fines, we wanted to be really careful not to go over budget. So those things we're a little more careful with. For the building operations, we spent just under 97% of available funds. So we're spending most of what we have. We did have around $20,000 in unexpended funds that will roll over into our fund balance. Again, we try to use what we need and also budget as close to what we need as possible, but those funds are available through the fund balance if needed for later if we do not need them. And again, most of that is because we were being really careful to not go over budget, and we had some personnel changes that were unanticipated. Lastly, I just want to highlight the revenues, and it looks like I went highlight crazy, but the one I wanted to point out was the library impact fees. This was reported as part of the village board meeting on Monday, but the village collected a lot more fees from developers this year for new projects, and so that amount significantly increased the available funds for the library project and offset a little bit of our increased expenses due to some time considerations. So I think that was all I really wanted to point out. But again, you know, we're within our budgeted parameters, and hopefully we'll be a little bit even closer on target this year, just given that it's going to be hopefully more of a normal year with being open to the public full time again.
Any questions on the financial reports? Okay, and I think the motion was to approve both together, so I think we're good there. Next is the committee reports.
So the only committee report is the building committee, that we did update them about Monday night's meeting and gave them a chance to opt out if they had signed up for the building committee a long time ago and their circumstances had changed. But anticipate that we'll be starting that group up again very, very soon to get that going when the time is right.
Thank you. Library director's report.
Since you guys have been in so many meetings this week, I'm not going to rehash all the things that I've already know you've read, but just want to highlight the winter reading program going on right now, which is a fun community event. And then we do have 2 page openings, one due to a promotion and one due to somebody else getting promoted at their full-time job. So those are good reasons to lose people, but we are a little shorthanded right now. And congratulations to Claire, who was promoted from a page position to a circ assistant position. We are trying to do regular department highlights each month now from some departments and quarterly from other departments. So the one thing I did want to highlight is we did get a wildflower initiative grant for $1,000 that Kara wrote that's going to support some native and wild pollinator programming with some community partners. So that's a great opportunity, and she was selected from over 300 applicants. So that was a really highly competitive grant. So we were lucky to get that one. There's also a calendar with our February programming. We're still doing a combination of hybrid, in-person, and virtual programming, and leaning heavily on our partners at the school and the senior center to have spaces to do those things safely, to allow for social distancing, and hybrid. OCA Media has been really helpful in streaming some of those programs so that we have those choices available.
Okay, next is the statistics report.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that one since we're going to go over the annual report, which is summarizing stats for last year. Our circ is almost rebounded to what it was pre-pandemic. Our visits are still a little lower, so we're finding fewer family members are coming in and still checking out almost the same amount of items. The main stat that still really hasn't rebounded is our computer use is a lot lower than it had been before. The pandemic, both because a lot of people have gotten devices as a result of the pandemic, or just don't want to be that close to other people for that length of time in the library.
Communications, village board announcements. Carlene, anything you want to share?
I think you were there for most of it. I will mention, and Mike is on, that the Sustainability Committee was approved at the last meeting, and that has gone out. And Mike is the person who asked for that committee and will be the village board person on it. I don't know if he can say anything about it. And it was a joint meeting. Let's see. That's about it. I think from the standpoint of being also on the Council on Aging, that meeting is tomorrow morning for the executive committee, and the whole process of them thinking about their visioning is coming up, and I suspect that they will be, well, I know that Rachel and Jennifer have already had some conversations about just sort of the whole visioning process with the library and how that can inform that process with the senior center. I think that's it, unless you have questions for Mike about the Sustainability Committee.
Anybody have questions? Okay, thank you, Carlene. School district announcements.
I thought I would mention something that is highly connected to what was discussed on Monday night. And that is a couple of years ago when Forest Edge Elementary School was built, the school district also purchased the forest behind it, and it is now officially designated a school forest. And in addition, we purchased an adjacent home that will serve as an environmental center. So I thought Jennifer did a really excellent job pointing out that environmental programming versus an environmental center is probably a different thing, and ensuring there's clarification around that before we move forward is also a good thing. But I just thought as we were discussing it, it would be good for the group to know that the community will be able to be serviced by an environmental center through the school district also. So perhaps that'll become a part of our discussion or even a part of our planning when we start thinking about what programming the library could offer at that site. And then what are the things then that could be offered at the school-based or school district-based environmental center in Fitchburg. And that's it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, discussion and possible action items. Joint meeting outcomes, site selection, and next steps for library project.
So I'm just going to recap really quickly Monday night, and just want to thank all the village board members here and all the library board members here. I know you've had a very intense 6 months, and you've all worked really hard to look out for the best interests of the library and the community. And that's really been noticed. Every time I hear from community members, they've really complimented all the folks here and how well you've handled the challenging situation, how much thought and advocacy you're putting into trying to come to the best possible solution, and just the approach that you've taken with that. So I appreciate all of that all the time, and all the time that your family shared with us. Out of all the other things you have going on, it really is meaningful to us. Our staff has noticed all the work you're putting in. It's just community members, donors. I've just heard so many good things about all of you and what you've been doing. So I did put a memo in the packet that talks about some of the priorities after a site was selected. And of course, this is written before we knew what the outcome of the Monday meeting would be. So as directed on Monday night, Martin is working on revised language for the MOU. I'm going to highlight just some of that with you tonight. Jeff Rao at Public Works will be taking down the future home of the Oregon Library sign that's on North Main Street. We are going to leave the fundraising thermometer there a little bit longer just because that's a good location for visibility. Even though that's not the site, it's just a nice visible location for now. We are also working with the village attorney and OPN and our owner's rep to try to get the agreement ready. We're hoping to have it ready for the 21st village board meeting. That is a little bit ambitious. We've been working on it for a long time, but just because some of the things are site specific in terms of costs and services needed, we are trying to get those updated very quickly. And it may or may not be feasible to get that thorough review we want done in time for that meeting. The deadline is Tuesday to be able to do that. So if it's not available in time for that 21st meeting, we'll have it available for the very next one if we can. Site survey is going to be a high priority so we can ensure that we have the best possible placement. And I have a proposal for that is in our packet for your consideration tonight to get that going. And then Vine Consulting will be working on an amended agreement. We've been paying full price and we're going to be crediting their services for the past couple of months for months that their services were less involved because of what we were doing as a site process. And then Vine Consulting is also updating the project schedule, which includes a budget, so we can kind of let Village know what our needs are in terms of cash flow to pay the bills if we stay on schedule. So when the contractors do work, that we have the cash in hand to pay those bills on time. The Village will be working on their borrowing plans for 2022. They had planned to borrow the remaining balance for the project in 2022 and 2023. So we'll leave it up to them to determine how to best do that borrowing. They may wish to borrow more because of interest rates, or they may wish to push them off based on our schedule, just depending on other needs. We'll kind of leave that up to them, but they will likely do some of the borrowing this year and next year to wrap up their commitment. Are there any questions on any of the priorities that I've just shared with you? All right, so I'm not seeing any. So again, I want to thank Mike for his motion that was trying to clarify some of those expectations and what those things for the Nature Alliance recommendations would look like. So I appreciate that we had very clear direction on what those things would be. So Martin started on a draft just to update the site information in the MOU to kind of clarify the property and remove some references to North Main Street. And this has changed like 4 times today, so this is a slightly different version than what you saw this morning, but most of it's very obvious, changing the property description, taking out some language that we are working on some language in this section because it's been very confusing to interpret each time which things have to be approved by what board. So our next version, which is still in my email inbox, is going to clarify which things require village board approval and library board approval a little bit more clearly. So there'll be some new language for that that's mutually beneficial. But the provision I want to draw your attention to is the language that Martin crafted related to Mike's motion. So he started with, incorporating the items listed on the Nature Alliance recommendation. And I did work with him a little bit today because of the concerns about making sure that we manage those expectations about wanting to fulfill the spirit of that recommendation, but also wanting to be careful with the language we used. I don't know if people can read this on Zoom or not, but we did add a clarification here to maybe suggest a mutually agreeable interpretation, saying that item number 7, which talked about a nature center, would mean incorporating elements and opportunities for connections to nature and nature education, both within the library facility and the immediate areas outside, but that it does not necessarily include the construction of either a standalone nature center or necessarily a exclusive nature space within the library. If we were to get funds to sponsor those things, that certainly could, but this is trying to just clarify that we want to use opportunities to do the nature connections and to try to just further define maybe what that could look like. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. Obviously, this will be up for village board discussion. Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, trying to hone that language a little bit more to match kind of, I think what you said at the meeting was space for nature education when you said it, but to try to just define that a little more clearly so that, a year from now when there might be different board members. I know 2 of the seats are going to be open for election this spring, that the folks looking at this will kind of have a very clear interpretation of what we were thinking when we had this conversation this week. I don't know what people are thinking. We're not going to vote on this tonight, but if you have feedback, I will forward it back to Martin for him to consider as he drafts the language for the board.
I feel this looks very clear, Jennifer. So someone who was coming into the situation new would have an understanding of the parameters.
And I think Jenny, I think we have Mike is raising his hand if possible, and then Carlene as well. Jenny, we lost your sound. So while you troubleshoot that, I'm gonna invite Mike to share any comments he might have.
Yeah, this is within the spirit of what you and I had originally talked about months ago after a board meeting, Jennifer, which was the idea of utilizing the library to basically educate about the park system and nature. And at the time you had talked about a hall of nature or something that had educational things, but it wasn't a solely dedicated purpose to that area. I think it's well within the spirit of what you and I had discussed, and I've talked to you before about intentions of getting a fund going to specifically be targeted at funding environmental education for the library. I'm still interested in pursuing that. So, I got no issues with this.
Great, thank you, Mike. Yeah, Mike was talking about some of the ideas that we had floated, Jenny and I had floated when we were first thinking about how this could work, were things like, I think butterfly garden and pollinator garden, you heard from the Nature Alliance, opportunities for like artwork to be perhaps nature or educationally inspired. I think if you've been into Forest Edge, you've seen some of their graphics on the wall that are educational or nature inspired. Things like Wanakee has a history hall, kind of a historical themed area of their library with displays. We could do something similar and have a nature hall, which is what that idea Mike was referring to. The landscaping could have labels, with education about the species or the gardening habits. So there's just a lot of ideas that we could run with. And I think we should, have that conversation with Nature Alliance representatives to try to get those ideas. There might be things we've never thought of, but I just want to mention some of those since Mike mentioned that example. Carlene, do you want to go ahead? I don't know if Jenny's sound is working yet or not.
I think it is, maybe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I just want to echo what Mike said and also say that if it were possible, I don't want to eat into any of the funds that the library has raised and other folks specifically for the library, but I'd also love it if there in the planning of the building there was just an estimate of what it would cost if we were to set aside something that was an exclusive nature space, and if there was interest in the Nature Alliance or other groups to raise that money. It would be, I think it would be great to have an exclusive space if we were able to have a group that raised that money.
Thanks, Carlene. Does anyone have thoughts on the wording of the MOU? I think it's pretty clear. It seems like it kind of gives the direction that we're looking for people in the future if things change for the boards, things like that. I just want to make sure, does anybody have any questions or comments so we can try to get those in with Martin sooner than later? And Carrie's shaking her head. I always worry about Carrie and her lawyer. So I'm always like, we made it past Carrie. So anything else, Jennifer, you wanted to kind of point out?
There were a few other Martin, editorials that Martin made, either because things were basically restating something that's already law or just that he thought would make it more clear. The one thing, sorry, I'm trying to get to the right place on the right version. So there's one section that was pretty relevant given the context of when this was written. But with the village hall moving first and things being different now, the number 5 really isn't necessary anymore. So we thought we'd just take that out. It's basically saying if we have a meeting room, the village would have the right to use it like anybody else, which we would obviously do. Carrie, do you want to have a comment on that one?
Well, my only comment is that I actually agree with Martin on a lot of the things that he took out, but my recollection is that much of this was put in originally by the village attorney. So, I think we do have to make sure that it flies past him. But it all makes sense to me, and I thought a lot of that stuff was redundant and confusing, so.
I'll mention that to him. We're trying to avoid spending a lot of money on edits and revisions. But I think this particular thing was written in mind when the village board or the library was planning to move first, and the village hall would be moving second and might need a space. So that was the intent there. The 2 other things that I do want to point out is the impact fees, that there were some impact fees that went towards the purchase of the Methodist Church property. So Martin and I are talking through that a little bit more, but basically we can't use impact fees towards the purchase of that property. And so the adjustment that is currently being suggested is that would just come out of the borrowing instead. It wouldn't change the amount of dollars we have available. It would just move it from one pool of money to another. It doesn't divorce us entirely from that church property in terms of the agreement, but there are other funds the village could look at to help us with things like bike trails and things. So I'm not sure it's worth fighting too much about, but Martin's still looking at that and the history on that, where that amount came from after the property was paid for. So we're doing a little more work on that one. Carrie, I don't know if you have any recollection on that to enlighten us on or not.
Yeah, I don't, Jennifer, and I mean, I think you're right that we can't use impact fees for property we're not using. And I think we'd have to go back and look at the original MOU to see, well, do we really owe that money to the village? But again, I tend to agree with you. We don't want to fight with the village either, and it's a matter of what works best for everybody. So.
Yeah, and he was going to check with the finance director and get a little more history on that to see, because it would be cleaner to not be associated with that property, because if they sell
Right.
it, or whatever, it just gets a little bit messier. So he's still working on looking into that a little bit more. The last thing I want to just point out is that he's putting some visuals in to just explain the property boundaries, and he did a pretty general outline. And the reason is that we want to just make sure that the final siting of the building really matches with the Nature Alliance's intentions for stormwater management, distance from wetlands, and best cost for the library. And so as we get into the civil engineering, we'll really be able to evaluate that. And so he left it kind of broader, and just to know that that has to be approved by the boards have to agree on that siting. So that's where it's at now. He has the Nature Alliance recommendations included verbatim, so that those are available as part of that MOU as an appendix, so that we can refer to them easily, as could anybody else reading the document, which I think is really helpful for future. Are there any questions or feedback? So I will probably email you about this later, but depending on whether the architect contract is also on the February 21st meeting, we can either approve these together as one board and have conversations about anything, or we can have each board approve them separately. It's a little nicer to approve them separately, because then you don't have to add necessarily one more meeting to your schedule, but then it also takes away the opportunity to work through any concerns that one board might bring, or any of these points that might need further discussion. So once I know a little bit more about that architect contract and where we're at with that, and where we're at with this MOU. I'll be reaching back out. If you, I'll send you the latest version tomorrow. And as if you read through it, if you have any concerns, please let me know. And then maybe we can try to do a joint meeting. We just have to have four members there for a quorum. And if it was just the only thing on the agenda, I would anticipate it would go very quickly. Is there anything else on the joint meeting or next steps that we want to talk about?
I think we're probably good, Jennifer. Thank you for
Okay.
keeping all of this straight for us. You're a rock star and we appreciate it.
I don't know about that, but I'm trying really hard.
Next, we want to adopt the site survey services. Yes, this one's important.
So we got a proposal from JSD to do the site survey services. And that's going to cover the majority of the school, or we'll cover the former school site area. And then what will likely have to happen at some point is they may need to designate a portion of that as kind of the library property, because library boards have exclusive control over properties designated for library use. And so basically they'll probably use the survey data later, not just to plan the building, but also to figure out which part of that property is library property versus whatever other uses the village board determines is correct. So I would recommend that you approve this JSD survey services for this amount. And just want to note that JSD is the engineer that would be working with us on the whole project. So it's beneficial to have them do kind of the survey and the work. And they work extensively in Oregon, so we're very familiar with the unique challenges that many of the Oregon properties have.
Can I have a motion to approve the JSD contract for $5,500?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Second by
Yeah.
Sheena. Any questions or comments?
I just wanted to ask you, Jenny, if you've had a chance to look at this and if this looks pretty standard to you, because
Yeah.
this is what you do.
Yeah, it looks reasonable price to look like a kind of a good scope for what we're looking for them to do. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. So all in favor say aye.
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 Hi.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Next is adopt program policy.
And so we have never had a program policy before, and Kara and Kelly work extensively on our programming, and it's just generally best practice to have a policy if you can. So they worked really hard to develop this policy, and I would recommend that we adopt it unless there's questions or concerns about it.
Does anyone have any questions, things they want to clarify?
I have one. I'm afraid. I'm looking at paragraph F. The library may host programs with religious or political content. I like the purpose of the programs will be to inform or entertain and not to persuade or convert. But I am a little bit concerned about hosting programs with religious content. You know, I know this is always an evolving area of the law, and it's not my field, but you know, there is always a concern when you use government funds for anything involving religion. So I wonder if anybody's looked at that.
Whenever we get into the legal stuff, it usually gets really, really expensive. So we try to look at what other libraries have done. We could, if it feels more comfortable, we could exclude religious. Like an example for the politics would just be something that talks about different, different, like could be like a candidate forum with people from different political affiliations or a political issue. The religious one, I can't think of an example of a religious program we've ever hosted, and I think we would think through that very carefully. But if the board's more comfortable, we could take that out for now and do more work and come back next time we review it, or once we've had time to research it more carefully.
I just feel like that would be safer, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think they were trying to protect, like, there's some community events maybe that
Yeah.
have things like Christmas, and that
Right.
would allow us to include a couple examples of something that might be associated with a particular religion, as long as we're not trying to advocate for one particular one. But yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Maybe it's something along the lines of differing perspectives, and not being as specific as religious or political content, because then that would allow you to hold different types of programming outside of those two and still kind of encompass that you're trying to inform.
Yeah, I like that language, Laura. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Carrie, would that address your concern, do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think as long as you take the word religion out, it addresses my immediate concern. And then, of course, you know, you do run into, depending on what the actual programs contain. But I agree with you, Jennifer. I think just because you have something that references a certain viewpoint or religion, I don't think that is a problem.
Okay. So I'm hearing to change the language, may host programs with differing perspectives, and that will remove the language about religious or political content. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you would also be removing the political, because I guess I have more of a concern about the political than I do about the religious.
Yeah, I think what I was understanding is we would take out this highlighted section and then just indicate with differing perspectives. And in general, we would never try to advocate for one political
Right.
context. And honestly, this more often comes into play when other groups are using your space and making sure your policy covers the space in general. So I don't think we would lean to do this very often, but.
Question about that. Would it need to refer to the library space may host, because it's not like I just know like OAP has sometimes, like, we wanted a space to use and we ended up not at the library because it was a political kind of organization, but
Yeah.
we weren't the library.
Yeah, so what our meeting room policy covers those rules. I don't recall exactly what it says, but that's vetted very carefully. I don't think we can exclude groups on basis of religion or politics. We just can't. It's just so it's a separate policy. This is only for programs that the library itself would host or co-sponsor. So that's a separate policy.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Jennifer, do you want us to approve this, but with the note about changing paragraph F there?
That would be fine with me. I think I'm clear on your direction. If you prefer to have it come back with the language amended next month, that's fine, but I'm comfortable tonight with the direction you provided, changing what you said.
Could I have a motion then to approve the adopt the program of policy with the change from religious and political content to differing views?
So moved by Stata.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Carlene, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Next is outreach policy.
So Kara was reviewing our homebound services policy in light of some earlier discussions we had about equitable access and trying to make that program more accessible, because we have very few people take us up on that particular service. And as part of that, she realized there's lots of connections with the outreach services that Kelly does to teens and youth, and tried to just roll all those considerations into one joint policy that would replace the homebound policy. So we recalling it the outreach policy to include the homebound services, but also any other outreach services that they might do to community partners or underserved audiences in our community.
Does anyone have questions or comments on this one?
I read a lot of policies every day for work, and I commend everyone who had a hand in writing these. I think they were really well done.
I'll tell them. Thank you.
And can I have a motion to approve the policy as presented?
So moved, Stata.
Is there a second?
Seconded by Goplin.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, this homebound policy will no longer be in place then because it's covered in the other one.
Next is 2021 Department of Public Instruction Annual Report. This one's always fun.
Yeah, so this is a report we're supposed to have 60 days to work on, and it turns out to be like 20 days. And we're required to report just general facts and expenditures and stats to the Department of Public Instruction every year, and have that report approved by the library board saying it's factual to the best of our knowledge. So much of it's just general library information, hours, and sometimes their instructions are very complicated, and so there's specific instructions with COVID about what qualifies as limited service and staff only. So it's just trying to report factually what our actual services were. They also have a section they've been collecting this year that's new in last year's report, and then expanded this year just to say what kinds of services you provided during COVID. So, do you provide reference service? Are you answering general information from the public? Just because some library services were suspended and others added new services to better serve the community as a result of COVID. So like curbside pickup, we did over 8,000 curbside pickups in 2021. Most of those were before we reopened, but we do have a handful of people that continue to prefer that option, that continue to do that now. These were kind of boring. One of the additions during COVID was that we did start offering electronic library cards that people could sign up for library cards online without necessarily coming into the library. So that's been a great addition that was encouraged by the pandemic. Collection. So we have more than 55,000 or more than 56,000 books, which, is quite a few books to move. So this kind of just highlights our different collections that we have. Also kind of summarizes some of our service stats. So our circulation last year was much lower than it had been pre-pandemic, but again, we were only open to the public for just over half of the year. So I think we're going to see we are seeing those rebound, and I can expect that we'll probably be kind of back where we are very shortly. Our reference transactions, again, were also down in library visits just because of our closure for, the first 6 months of 2021. We didn't reopen until the middle of May to the public. So is there any questions on any numbers you've seen so far? I don't want to go past it, but it gets a little tedious too. So program statistics, we used to just have a simple number of programs and attendees, and it's gotten really complicated because of the multifaceted ways that we're offering programs. So it might be a program that's pre-recorded on Facebook. It could be something that's in person and also streamed by OCA Media Live. And then there's certain rules about can you count views of a program that aired, for example, on YouTube, and at what period you can count those views for. So now the program statistics have gotten a lot more complicated to make sure you're reflecting the platforms you're using and just the uses of each different category. Our programs are a little affected too because we don't have really the program space that we had before. The Sue Ames room is still being used by staff because our staff space has really, the challenges of our staff space have really been magnified. And so we're really struggling with how do we, in the summer when we get busier, how do we serve those programming needs, but still serve our staff needs? And so that'll be a conversation we're gonna have moving forward, how to keep using that Sue Ames room to the best of our community's need. We also are required to report your names and addresses to the DPI so they can contact you if they need to. There is also a revenue section here that reports the expenses that we have and the revenues we have. So the majority of our funding comes from the Village of Oregon. We do get a significant amount of funding here from Dane County for services. They have a complicated funding formula. And then we do get reimbursement from adjacent counties. Again, these numbers are significantly lower for 2021 because they were based on services that were impacted by the pandemic. And then different sources of federal funds and state funds and grant funds that we've got as well to enhance what we had available. There's a whole lot of things that are recorded as all other operating incomes. That includes fine revenue, lost revenue, copier money, some donations under certain circumstances. So it's kind of complicated. So it doesn't necessarily always match up with the village reports just because of how the directions require you to report things. But it does give you a good comparison purpose from year to year. For expenses, our biggest expenses, salaries, wages, and benefits for employees, and that's kind of the most important part of our services, and then also our collection and serving the community. We do have those expenses to the library system as a major expense that we do have to report separately. And then other operating expenses are things like utility bills and snow removal and just any other catch-all expense that we might have that isn't included or delineated above. We also have specific rules about what we have to report in capital and where and what year. So for example, when the village did the borrowing this year, they borrowed an extra $25,000 to pay for the fee of the borrowing itself. So because that was a fee that shows up on our accounts, it shows as revenue and expense, though it doesn't impact our bottom line at all. And then we are showing new library building project expenses. That includes all the campaign donations we got this year. And then also the expenses we had related to building costs, not just, there's a certain special definitions of that, but most of that is for building project planning. And then the other funds held at the end of the year includes funds raised previously. So it doesn't match up with what we actually have in the bank for the building, but it's as of a certain date and how their instructions work. Are there any questions on those before I go on? I'm sorry. I figure you guys are all meetinged out, so I'm trying to get through things as fast as possible. The loans to non-residents is very important, and that has very strict instructions on how to calculate, and the library system double checks that. Those numbers are based on our automation system data for where people that use our library reside, and that determines reimbursement. So there's a certain reimbursement formula, so the 52 circulations from Sauk County would be eligible for reimbursement in the future. So it's really important that those numbers are accurate. And then just some technology information on our internet services. We also have to state that we comply with system membership requirements, and we do comply in all categories. So that's something every year we have to reevaluate. Are there any questions? Otherwise, we would need a motion to approve the report. Just to indicate that we believe it's accurate to the best of our knowledge. If we do notice something that is either changed or we determine to be inaccurate, we can amend the report with the state.
Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Carlene.
I'll second.
Carrie, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And then the statement concerning public library system effectiveness.
So this again, we each year required to say whether or not the system met the needs of the library. If you do say they do not, you have to go through a process to very thoroughly explain why you feel that way. So my recommendation would be to indicate that they did provide effective leadership and met our needs. There's many support services that they provide. Again, there's always room for growth, but overall, they've been amazingly helpful to us. So that's my recommendation. Again, we'd need a motion to approve that statement.
So you want to, someone want to make a motion to approve the statement concerning public library system effectiveness?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Carleen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. I think it's next the meeting location.
Yeah,
So for the month of March, do we want to stay virtual or do we want to try to find somewhere in the village to meet?
I will be gone. I won't be in town for the March meeting, so if it's not virtual, I can't attend.
Okay. Are we okay with staying virtual with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, we will plan for March to be a virtual meeting then.
Thank you.
Mhm. And then, so the joint meeting, village board meeting, that was Monday, so we're good there. And then our next meeting is Wednesday, March 9th. It'll be virtual. Are there any future agenda items anyone would like to add? Okay, then can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Great meeting.
Yep.
Thank you.
Not even 6 o'clock.
That's my goal all the time, less than an
Yeah.
hour.
Way to go.
Good
Thanks,
job.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Aye.
Buddy.
thank you.
Bye.